All right, good evening everyone, and welcome to our panel on writing trauma. In this discussion, our panelists, all writers with experience who explore trauma in their work, will discuss the complexities of writing trauma, how to write trauma ethically, how to write trauma without cannibalizing one's experiences, how to balance the craft of writing with the craft of writing trauma, and ultimately what it means to write trauma. I'm here on behalf of the Yale Women Faculty Forum, and we're very happy to be joined in support of this event by the program in Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies, by the English Department, the Native American Cultural Center, the Office of LGBTQ Resources, and the Afro-American Cultural Center. I should mention this event is being recorded by Yale Broadcasting. I should also mention that we will have a bit of a change of plan with live questions from the audience rather than written questions, and so we will have microphones that will go up and down the aisles at the question period at the end. So without further ado, let me introduce our moderator and our panelists for this evening. Our moderator for this evening is Dr. Melanie Boyd. Melanie Boyd is Director of the Office of Gender and Campus Culture, a lecturer in the Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies program, an assistant dean in Yale College Dean's Office. She has a PhD in English and Women's Studies, and she wrote her dissertation on the rhetorical politics of innocence, agency, and sentimentality in feminist trauma narratives. Melanie's current work focuses on sexual violence and cultural transformation, drawing on feminist and queer theory along with research in public health and psychology. She has created a nationally recognized program for preventing sexual violence through positive cultural change. And now our panelists. Dr. Tressie McMillan-Cottom is a digital sociologist, professor, writer, and columnist. She's spoken across the nation and across the world on technology, higher education, race, gender, class, and social inequality. Audiences and readers connect with her ability to make complex ideas relatable. Her latest book, which is called Thick, draws on 10 years of writing for the public on many of our society's most pressing fault lines. It joins her other books, including the acclaimed Lower Ed, as a genre-busting academic career that spans public policy to cultural critique. Therese Marie Meilleur is from the Seabird Island Band in British Columbia. Her work has appeared in Granta, the LA Times, Guernica, Pacific Standard, Elle, Mother Jones, as well as elsewhere. She's the author of Heartberries, a memoir. It's a story of love and violence, and Heartberries won the New York Public Library's Best Book of the Year award and was an NPR Best Book of the Year as well. She teaches creative writing at Purdue University, where she's a visiting assistant professor. Aubrey Hirsch is the author of Why We Never Talk About Sugar, a short story collection, and this will be his legacy, a flash fiction chapbook. Her stories, essays, and comics have appeared in many outlets, for example, American Short Fiction, the Florida Review, Black Warrior Review, the Nib, the Rumpus, and the New York Times. Sayid Jones is our next panelist. His debut poetry collection, Prelude to Bruise, was the winner of the 2015 Penn Joyce Osterweil Award for Poetry and the 2015 Stonewall Brook Award and the Barbara Gittings Literature Award. It was also a finalist for the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award. The collection was a finalist for 2015 awards from the Lambda Literary and Publishing Triangle, and his memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives, will be published by Simon & Schuster this fall. And Roxane Gay, who writes on feminism, race, gender, and intersections, is a presidential visiting fellow at Yale this semester. She's a contributing opinion writer to the New York Times, the author of the books 80, An Untamed State, and the New York Times bestseller Bad Feminist, also the nationally best-selling Difficult Women and the New York Times bestseller Hunger. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guests and have a good evening.
So thanks. Thank you, Claire and the Women Faculty Forum, WFF, WGSS, and everyone else for organizing this and being here tonight, and thanks to all of you for being here. I want to just jump into this conversation. I am so interested to hear all of your different pieces. Claire has just quoted for us Roxane's framing questions, the hows, right? How does one write ethically without cannibalizing oneself? Louder? Am I not mic'd?
The mic
loud enough.
You have
All
to
right.
raise the mic higher.
I have to raise my mic higher. Thank you, everyone. How's that? Better? Thank you. Okay. So before we get to the hows, which I think is going to be the heart of our conversation, I wanted to start a little bit with the who's and the what's. When you're writing anything, thinking about who your audience is, how you're connecting with them, what it is you want them to take away from your writing is, of course, at the heart of it. When you're writing about trauma, that becomes even more complicated. And I know none of your audiences are singular. I'm particularly interested in hearing about how those different intersecting audiences that you have, who are you thinking of when you write? What do you want them to hear? What do you want them to take away? So I want to just kind of open that up.
We're all looking at Roxane.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. Okay. That's a good question. The reality is I don't think of anyone but myself when I write. I write for myself. And I have no regrets about that, because when I think too much about audience, I tend to compromise the integrity of it, what it is that I want to say. I think about pandering too much because I want to say something that will please people. So I pretend that no one's going to read my work, partly so I have the courage to put it out into the world, and partly so I don't compromise what I want to say. And in that, I try to write the things that would have helped me when I most needed that kind of help, regardless of whatever topic it is that I'm writing about. Tressie, what about you?
Thank you, Roxane. Actually, very similarly, in that I start from, so philosophically, I am always writing for Black women, and I'm always very specific about that. One, because I believe I come from a Black feminist tradition where you have to name your positionality, and so that's mine. But like Roxane, once I sit down to actually write, I have to think of no one. And one of the things I've said to people about that is, like Roxane, if I'm thinking about the audience, I do a version of nonfiction writing where I am trying to make an argument. I am trying to put forward a way of thinking about the world. And so that comes with, I think, a certain type of responsibility. And because it is an argument, if I am thinking too much about the audience, I start to write for both of us. I start to write my argument and the counter argument, which is an excellent way to lose your voice in the writing and to lose your place and lose your thread of your thinking and your argument. So I actually have to forget and assume that no one is ever going to read it. I have to, and have learned over time, to trust that my final product will circle back to my politics and my beliefs and my ethics, which is a process. I would actually say only recently have I been able to say with complete certainty that I trust myself when I forget the audience, that I'm still going to write what I intended to write. And so I'm not writing for them at that time. And that became especially important, I think, when writing about trauma, because I wanted to defend myself. And I wanted to defend the people whose stories are implicated in my story. That's the thing about writing part of your own biography, right? All of our biographies are interwoven with other people's biographies. And I think in thinking about the audience too much, I would have compromised too much of my narrative, not even probably for myself, but for others. And so I don't think about anyone. I try to keep my laser focus on what is the thing I set down to do. Am I putting forward an argument that I think is something that only I can write? I only ever want to write the thing that only I can write. If someone else can write it, I'll wait for them to write it and read it. That actually would make my life much easier. But with the trauma, especially, for me to stay focused in the space that I need to be in to write about it, I have to not write for anyone.
Yeah. I mean, Black feminist politics and art saved my life, taught me how to save my life, so I think it's no coincidence that certainly how I think about this certainly aligns with what you've both said. I would add that, especially with writing about trauma in nonfiction, I am thinking about myself, but I'm thinking of it as like time travel. Usually, and it's vague, but it's like when conceiving the project, I'm trying to imagine if in 2019, knowing everything I know about where I ended up, who I now know, right? The queer friends and the women and the mentors and mentees that are now a part of my life and have brought all of the color to my life now. If I could step into a portal and come out on the other side at the precise moment that a past version of myself most needed that color, what would I say? what would I reach through the portal? You know, what would be the book or the essay or the poem or the little bit of advice, you know, that I would hope, you know, Saeed in, you know, January of 2008, the morning after a lover has tried to beat him up and kill him, you know, and he's getting on the plane back to college and trying to figure out how he feels. What does he need to hear that morning? Or Saeed, you know, summer of, I don't know, 2003, and he's at the public library in Louisville, Texas, looking for books about being gay, and they're all either about AIDS or they're about dealing with your gay child as if it's a cancer diagnosis. What would be best in that moment, you know? And so it is thinking about myself, but like with that intentionality that is rooted in the power of knowing, and I think everyone on the stage can speak to this, of feeling the peril of feeling alone, even if it's not accurate, right? But feeling alone in moments of trauma or post-trauma, how can we reach ourselves?
Yeah, this is also interesting to hear. My thoughts on it are a little bit different because I actually don't know that I'm ready to write about something that I experienced as trauma until I can think about it in an outward way. You know, if I'm thinking about, you know, my past self or someone in my same position or just myself, then it's, for me, that means it's too raw or I don't yet know what I want to say about it. And it's not until I start to think about how I can turn this into something that can teach someone something or connect with someone, you know, on a more universal level that I feel like I'm actually ready to approach it. And maybe it's just because it's too scary or it somehow makes it feel like it had value, like that horrible experience, that it had value because now I can turn it into something that does have value. But yeah, for me, I am kind of more audience forward, I guess, when I'm writing this kind of material.
I do. You know, I think of myself, I don't think anyone will read it, which I think liberates me because I've lived before audiences most of my life, like, you know, like welfare workers, they want you to be pitiful so that you can get the resources, so you don't get to present your real self. And men on a date, you're trying to assume that you have good credit, you don't. You're trying to assume that you're not battered or that you're not broken inside so that they will love you. You know, I don't think of those people when I write, but I know they're watching now. And I think it's going to do something for the social worker who did my casework to read the book and know that I had an interior life. And I think that's really important for Native women. Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that that's part of the challenge is staying true to the thing that you want to say, to the person who you want to reach in the past or the present, with that awareness always that there are all these other audiences sort of circling around in different ways. When we come to the question that I know you've been working on in your class as well, Roxane, of what does it mean to write trauma ethically, I'm curious, I mean, I think that's part of it, but what does that challenge mean to you as you're sitting down to write? What are the pieces that you're trying to navigate?
Yeah, that's a question that I have been really preoccupied with for about 10 years, because that's when I first started writing about my trauma publicly. And at the time I was working on my first novel, An Untamed State, and it involves a kidnapping and some brutality, sexual violence, and then the recovering and the aftermath. And as I thought about that, I just wanted to make sure that I was telling the story well, of course, and that I was telling the story ethically. That I wasn't writing these scenes of violence in a way that was gratuitous or overly stylized, because all too often when we see people write about trauma, they make it seem like this gauzy, sort of almost beautiful experience from which there is immediate and profound redemption. And that's not necessarily the reality of reality. And so for me, the most important consideration was, how do I do this honestly? How do I do this in a way that people don't think, oh, what a beautiful scene? Because if I'm writing about a rape, it's not beautiful, it's ugly. And I want the reader to feel like it's ugly. I want them to feel the importance of it. And I also want them to actually not be able to read it. I think that you should be able to write violence in ways that are honest and unreadable, because when it's readable, that means that it's something that you're compelled to read. So I just try to be true as possible to the actual realities. And I also want to make sure that I'm not re-traumatizing readers who have had similar experiences or who find this kind of experience, which I hope is everyone, deeply unacceptable. And so it's a fine line between being explicit and being open and being true, and also making sure that you are not traumatizing the reader.
I listened to Aubrey and Roxane and everyone, and I'm thinking about ethics for me operated on a couple different levels. So I write a lot about the institutional violence that is enacted, particularly on Black women. And through my own experience of it, I talk about my experience in the healthcare system, for example, in the medical field. And I had to make a couple of choices. So one was a choice about voice. I was thinking about what Roxane just said, which was, if you could leave that essay unscathed, I would have thought I had done it unethically. And I think that there is, that some readers are motivated to slip into the interior lives of people who are different from them, particularly minoritized people, and to enjoy the violence, the sort of visceral effect of enjoying the violence and getting all of the sort of sexual cognitive thrill of watching the violence enacted upon us, and then they get to leave unscathed. Right? And so my first ethical choice was I did not want to write that. And in fact, I remember saying to my editor, if I write this, I'm going to give it a shot, right? Because I didn't want to write it, frankly. And I thought, I'm going to give it a shot. But if I think that anybody can read this and leave this story without feeling implicated, it would have been, to me, an unethical retelling of the trauma. So that's one of my things that I tried to keep in mind. I debated with myself quite a bit the extent to which I would reveal identifying characteristics of others. And then I just came down on the side of, if you did it to me, then you deserve the story, you deserve the retelling. But my defense there is always that it be honest. If it was as honest as I could be, and I mean, I try to be as honest in the telling of the big pieces of the story as I am in the details. Right? So sometimes I think we can write trauma because we are so committed to just having people feel this thing that the details can get mired down in something that can be a little untrue. And the less true the details are to me, the less ethical the telling is. Because my goal is for you to see how brutal and traumatic everyday routine violence is. I don't want to make it more exceptional than what it is. I don't want it to be fantastical, right? I don't want sparkles and slow-moving bodies. I want you to look at a bureaucratic form and feel as though somebody has reached inside of you and taken something out of you, because that's what they often do to people, right? And so for me, it is to ground the trauma in as many honest details as I can to try to keep an ethical check on myself. And then there's a constant conversation with myself about, I can only do that well when it's scabbed over, right? I read Kiese Lyman's book, Heavy, recently, which I highly recommend to everyone. And at the end, I remember throwing the book across the room, which means I enjoyed it. And I just skated across the room. I was like, ah!
Curse a little bit. You didn't have to do that.
I was so
I mean, he really didn't have to do that.
Thank you. I was
How dare he?
pissed. And I said to kids, I said, you understand, one, it was, yes, this is me saying I'm in a good emotion, I'm with you. But because, it took me a while to go, because he had written before his scab was done. And I just felt completely convicted in the reading of that. And so I am now in a conversation with myself, and I say that to say I don't have a good answer to this part of the ethical layer, because I'm still debating it. He brought something up for me about whether or not we can do that while we're still processing the trauma. I don't know. My rule before reading Heavy had been, I only write about the trauma once I had the scab, right? Because the thing with the trauma is that people are going to poke at it, right? Once there's an audience, they're going to poke at it. And so, but I don't know. I took something from him, and I'm now debating that with myself.
I didn't want to be a good person in my book. I thought that was really important. I think they look for good victims and survivor stories where you transcend the experience or you become a better person for the sake of that trauma or something like that. I didn't want to be just when I had postpartum depression. I want to write the worst thing I did as a mother, so that I could write well about it, because I hadn't seen a book that even took the shame off of that mental exhaustion and everything I went through. But I wasn't just, I didn't rationalize my actions, and that was really important because it made the potency of what was done to me even more potent. Because when you have a full character that is traumatized by something so regular, it's always typical how they hurt us.
Yeah.
Always,
Right.
why
Always
should we
typical.
write it
Right.
in a literary styling if it's just up and down this way? So that was really important. I think it upped the potency because you saw me as a human being, really fallible and also troubled, but also smart, and full. And then you see how that was stripped from me, and I think that was ethical. Also, I don't want to tour anyone in my grief or in my trauma, because I think people are titillated when they can see our experiences as a poor Indian or as an Indian with a drunken father, but I didn't want to tour anybody through that. I wanted to put them in my journey, which, is hard to exact and execute.
Yeah.
I think as a man on this stage, and writing about trauma, there are some moments of difference, even as a gay man, right? Like, particularly when writing about violence, like there is actually such an extensive body of work about men grappling with violence. I would read how straight white men in the 20th century would write about boxing, for example. I certainly would read about violence enacted on gay men, and black men, and so I became aware of a few things that one, noticing the patterns, noticing like the banality of male violence in terms of how it's typically written about, reported on, and discussed, and because I'm telling my story and I'm there, okay, Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr., Tamir Rice, they can't come back, unfortunately, and say, you all were looking here, but if you look here, right in this moment, you will notice something. And so I realized I could do that. I had the opportunity to shift the weight. And I think very much, I very much embrace difficult women. I wanted to be difficult too. And so I tried to look at, even in moments of someone is possibly going to kill me, right? If this man succeeds in this moment, if I let go of his hands, he could absolutely bash my head into this floor and I could die. But also, I still have an erection right now. I'm still turned on because this is a lover. And I was like, let's bring that into it. Also, I'm angry at him. I think he's dumb. Like, I was trying to look at, I think I'm better than him because I am in a women's studies class right now. And I understand, literally, I remember, literally on the floor wrestling for my life. And I'm thinking about Bell Hooks, and I'm thinking about Audre Lorde, and I'm thinking about how arrogant I feel. Even as this knowledge clearly has not prevented me from ending up in this situation. So I found in kind of doing a counterweight to the weight of the canon in terms of how we write about these moments with men, I felt important both for the bigger picture, but also for myself to demonstrate I am a victim, but victims are still people, and I don't deserve what happened to me, but my full humanity was in that room when it happened. And part of that means is that I was just as complicated as the man who was trying to kill me. And that, unfortunately, when we hear about people, particularly who don't survive those moments, right? That is what's taken away. You see the way Emmett Till's mother, has to talk about Emmett Till, and it's very strategic because she has to galvanize literally an international movement to even get the coffin to Chicago, by the way, right? They weren't even going to get the boy's coffin there. So she had to actually cast him as a totally naive, totally innocent figure. He had no idea about the virulence of racism in Mississippi because he was from Chicago. How should he know? Though Chicago was, of course, very segregated, right? She had to do that. And I'm sure if he came back and had, opportunity, he might say, but mom, So that's what we have the opportunity to say. What are the ethics of saying, but mom, in that moment?
Right. Figuring out how the trauma story does not become simplified, right? Because there's so much pressure on the weight of it to simplify itself.
Absolutely, and we have this very singular idea of victimhood, as Saeed points out, that if you've suffered, you are a saint. And we see this all the time in the public sphere, where when something bad happens to you, all of a sudden you become canonized. But the alternative, especially when you're a person of color, is that you need to be canonized in order to get some consideration. And Tamir Rice is an incredible example because he was just a boy playing in a park. And people were like, well, he shouldn't have been playing with a toy gun in a park. Where were his parents? So we have to say, no, he's an innocent, perfect 12-year-old boy because otherwise his life doesn't matter. And we have to do the same thing when we're writing about our stories and when we're writing about how we suffered. The reality is I don't want to be canonized. Like, I am a deeply, deeply flawed individual. And that frankly makes me more interesting. But that doesn't diminish the ways in which I have suffered. It doesn't absolve those who have caused me harm. And I think the more we write about these nuances and are real about our imperfections and the ways we've suffered, the better we are going to tell stories about trauma.
Yeah, and certainly none of your stories, any of you on this stage, are oversimplified or innocent or, right, this is what makes you all so wonderful here, that your capacity to tell this more complex story. I'm wondering about, I'm sort of going back to my question about who you're writing for, right? Because to the extent that the sort of first pass of that was about writing for your earlier selves, this feels to me like part of that is being able to hold out for those selves or the sort of permutations of those selves that are out in the world, the notion that in order to have this count, you don't have to have been fully innocent. And as I say that, I don't mean to that the complexity always has to be there, right? Because the flip side is, as soon as you give up on the innocence, then, well, it must have been all your fault, or, you must have deserved it. So keeping that balance just seems so critical. Tied into that balance, I think, is you were speaking about this a few minutes ago, the need to move between the individual, the specificity of the individual stories, and all of the broader cultural patterns, right? The patterns of power and privilege and oppression, that the histories, the very particular histories that you're tapping into, that give those individual specificities their meaning. And at the same time, those very patterns are so often about the erasure of specificity, right? So once you try to get those things in dialogue with each other, I'm curious about that, if you could talk about how you are, from all of your really different angles, weighing the broader circulating dynamics without ever having that lose sight of the person, the actual whole human person at the center.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. How you kind of add in research to your piece to give it that kind of universal feeling or to tap into what's going on. Some of my writing, a lot of my writing has to do with medicine and trauma, or science and trauma in some way, like memory and trauma, or just trying to be a woman and get help in the medical institution, which is quite challenging. That has led to traumatic experiences for me. And yeah, I definitely try to do both of those things. I think it's almost like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down kind of thing, where you can be attempting to educate people about a problem, but a lot of people are not going to read that article unless there's a narrative, because people like a story and they like a feeling, and just reading a set of statistics about women being misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed or turned away is not going to be compelling. But if you can give people an emotional arc that goes like this, they'll read it and they'll take it in. They'll take in the other stuff with it. So I think even if it might be interesting for me to just write you a list of statistics about women in medicine, and it would be very interesting and I could give you a lot of them, it might not be interesting to listen to until I can say, well, listen to what happened to me. You know, like, let me tell you about the list of medications that I took. Let me tell you about, you know, I had a heart attack and I didn't get an EKG for 6 hours because I was a young woman and I got 2 pregnancy tests before I got an EKG. Both were negative. But, you know, and that makes you do that, right? It makes you go in the way that if I say, you know, 75% of women with autoimmune disorders are misdiagnosed for more than 5 years. You're like, huh, interesting. That's an interesting fact, but it doesn't necessarily compel you emotionally. So yeah, I kind of see the two as in some ways inextricable. Like if I just tell you my story, it's just my story. If I just tell you the statistics, it's just statistics. But if you can put them together, then hopefully you can make something that, you know, ideally might make a difference.
Yeah. And of course, the statistics are also woven into the conditions that create your story in the first place, right? That it's not, they're all of a piece.
Yeah, I'm implicated in this in particular because I'm called to do it because I'm a sociologist, right? And so that's what I'm trained to do. You know, in Western culture, we love to separate, you know, the rational way of knowing the world from the emotional way of knowing the world. And one of the things that I try to do in my writing is to reconnect those two things. So, you know, to the point of, you know, I can tell you a statistic, but can I make you feel a statistic? Right? It's just, for me, the creative challenge, quite frankly. It is, can I write structure narratively that is also honest to the empirics? So for me, this is a false divide between what we know and how we come to know it. Our senses are how we come to know, right? Our intellect may be the process by which we come to believe we know. But those two are actually always operating at the same time, and to the extent that we have ever separated those two, I think it is a false divide. And I think the power of something like trauma, because trauma is one of the few spaces, because it's such an extreme, it's such an emotional extreme. I think it's one of the few places where we aren't able to deny that both of those things are happening. The trauma is usually being enacted upon you because of some macro process, right, that has occurred, right? It's the moment when you feel history and biography and politics. And trauma is also the moment that interrupts all of the ways we've lied to ourselves about our emotions, right? And so it is in trauma where I think we have a particular opportunity to get rid of the false dichotomy of those two ways of knowing the world. And that's why it's challenging, but I also think it's why it's probably more possible there than it is in some other narrative retellings. And so for me, yeah, the challenge is always to ground. Again, I feel called to do so. The creative challenge for me is trying to do so well. But also, I think it is the most powerful form of knowledge. It is the one that I think is most where I am living my responsibility to any sort of inherited knowledges that I have, at the same time that I honor any sort of acquired knowledges I have accumulated during my own life. It's the moment when I get to live up to both of those, and the challenge for me is, can I do it? And so I try to do that in every piece, but I feel especially responsible for doing it when I'm writing about trauma.
I feel like one of the deeper and more dangerous flaws or features of men, and in terms of how we write about our experiences, is the tendency to lean on the side of I am the only one X thing has happened to, and it is the most significant version of whatever, you know,
Right.
or thus my story, you know, that there's this weight, and it's, you know, it's connected to all kinds of reasons, but, you know, because, you know, straight, rich, white, cisgender men are set up to write whatever is going to be the great American, da-da-da, you know, so that's a part. So knowing that, you know, I did not read books by men by choice until I was almost in graduate school. Because I was so resistant and disgusted by what I saw in classrooms, you know. And so feeling that so viscerally, I tried to compensate for it in my own writing. And so I found that with my own experience, the two great fortunes for me was one, time. I'm a slower writer than I realized. Like this book, I started writing the essay that became this book actually the week after I got back to campus in 2008, right? Writing an essay about it actually was how I began to deal with it. So long time. And I sold the book spring of 2015. I thought I'd be done in like a year or two, and I'm almost done, right? So it just took time, but by the grace of time, you're able to step further and further away from like, I'm the only one, it's the most da-da-da-da-da. So that helped. The other thing is, I've been in a newsroom. I've been working at BuzzFeed for 6 years now, first as LGBT editor, culture editor, and now I host a morning show. And so I've been surrounded by reporters, and I've gotten to see with such great respect how they do their job, and you naturally begin to soak it up. And so as time kind of, kept stretching out and I'm working on this book, I would start talking about what I was working on. And, it just happens. I don't know, I'm one of those, I can't keep a secret about something I care about that I'm working on. It comes, we're at a bar, like where I'm gonna start talking about it, and I started paying attention to other people sharing their stories. I'll never forget like telling a young man, we were like at a bar, it is loud as hell, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and a guy like, here's what I'm writing about, and he's like, oh yeah, I met a guy at a party once, and I went back to his place, and we had sex, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and he was gone, and all of his roommates were just standing around the bed, looking at me. And I mean, it's like like rock music is, and I was just stunned. And so I've had so many of those moments that I can't pretend I'm the only person or the most special or the most hurt or the most wise. And so then when I go back to write, I tried as best I can to nod, to really bow, frankly, to all of those other people. Because when I read those work by, those classic male, novelists and writers, that's what I don't see. I don't see the bow, the humility to other people.
I think, I know my text is informed by statistics, like personally statistics offend, like they're weaponized against Indigenous people continually. They do no service to me. I already know we have it bad. But I know my text is informed. If I committed to the book, and the book said it held the women in my family up here. And I had to start learning that they were going to be my primary source for history. It wasn't going to be silly translations of Indigenous knowledge. It was going to be the women in my family. And if I was going to make a text that was legacy, it had to hold the history and be honest and accountable and true. So I think it changed history for me. And the text is informed by all the information. It's informed, by Roxane's work. It's informed by all the poets I read, and you can see that in the quality of the work. So in a lot of ways, I didn't need to expound and give data and qualify all of my things with lived experience of others, because it's all in the text. You can feel it,
It's night and day reading a writer who reads passionately and with humility, and a writer who does not. It might still be good work, but I mean, like once I started realizing that was such a value for me, and reading interviews from other writers who can't make it throughout an interview without praising someone else. Once you begin to notice that, I think it says a lot, because it's actually a worldview. It's not a small detail.
It is. And I think about this quite a lot, because I'm actually a rhetorician by trade. And so, especially during my doctoral education, I was thinking quite a lot about the rhetorical appeals and ethos, pathos, logos, and how you craft an argument to be believed. And so I do rely on external factors like statistics and anecdata to bolster my personal experience, as Aubrey says, where people aren't going to care if you don't give them that emotional appeal, if you don't give them that reason to care. But one of the things, especially as I get older and more mature as a writer, is that I try to resist universality. Because people try to flatten experiences, and they say, well, I can't relate to that, so it must have no value. And one of the things, especially as a Black woman, that I want to do is assert that my narrative and people who look like me and live in bodies like mine, our stories matter, whether or not Becky can relate. And it goes a long way to, I think, making my work have an impact when I move that way. And one of the most surprising things is, because I have done it well, is that people who I would think have wildly different experiences from mine can relate. Sometimes specificity matters, and I try to prioritize that.
So I'm curious, Roxane, you have this fabulous phrase about how does one write trauma without cannibalizing oneself, one's own experiences, the experiences of others. Can you unpack what are you thinking of with that? And I'm curious to hear you all play around a little bit with this idea.
Yes, oftentimes when you're a marginalized person, people think that the only thing you can be an expert on is yourself and what you've experienced. So if you're a woman, you have to write about being a woman. If you're LGBTQ, you can only write about that experience. If you're Black or a person of color, that's all you can write about. If you've been traumatized, that's all you can write about. You can't write about, say, climate change. And oftentimes we contain multitudes, and we do want to write about things that go beyond our subject position. But when we do write from our subject position, we shouldn't have to cannibalize ourselves. And by that I mean we shouldn't have to tell you every gory detail. I remember when Bad Feminist came out, there's an essay in it called What We Hunger For, and in it I write about my sexual assault, but I don't offer any real details about it. And a woman reviewed it, and she said that when she realized I wasn't going to detail my assault, she threw the book across the room. But not because she loved it.
Yeah.
The other kind.
The Becky book.
And she was just so angry and disappointed that I didn't give all the gory details. She felt robbed and cheated.
Yep.
And I have never forgotten that. First of all, I'm petty and I don't forget anything. I remember every word of every bad review. You're welcome. But what really stunned me was that she needed me to tell her the most intimate details, things that my partner doesn't even know. And why? Why did you want me to eat my own flesh in that way for your delectation? It's not necessary. And so I strongly encourage any writer who's writing from the personal to really consider what you're saying and why. Who do you think you're appeasing? Does it serve the narrative that you're trying to put into the world? Does it contribute to the purpose that you're trying to fulfill? And if it doesn't, save it. Keep your boundaries firm. Know what your boundaries are before you go into it, because the publishing industry is definitely going to try and get you to compromise your boundaries at every opportunity. And so if you're not willing to stick to them, they will take everything from you and you'll have nothing left for yourself. You'll have no privacy. And I just didn't want to put certain images in the heads of the people who love me most. You don't need to know like this terrible thing to know I went through a terrible thing. And so I just really resist it. And when I see people cannibalizing themselves for $50, mind you, which is the going rate, I just feel so sad because it cost them far more than they received.
Yeah, we were talking about this last night in Roxane's class about how there is a huge market for the sort of like trauma zoo, right? Where you can take this terrible thing that happened to you and put it out for $50 on the internet and say, look at this horrible thing. Can you believe it? That happened to me, that horrible thing. You see that? Let's all look at this horrible thing that happened to me. And it bums me out. You know, like when I see those essays getting churned out by people.
Disproportionately by women and young people,
Yeah,
I should say.
yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, we're not, while there's a market for it from, able-bodied white Western men, there's not nearly as sizable a market for that as it is from women, people of color, all the people that our culture loves to hate. women, people of color, young people, and queer people, right? There's a huge market for wanting to consume them. And I think about Roxane calling it cannibalization because, coming from bell hooks is thinking about the eating of the other. This idea that we are at a point in consumerism where now we want you to show yourself eating yourself. Right, it's a very Black Mirror-esque sort of satire on the state, I think, of the stage of capitalism and the way we consume things. The way we consume people is how we also consume information. We don't even want to consume it anymore. We want to watch you get consumed and consume yourself. And we have a particular set, I think, of perverse economic incentives to get people to do that. I called Roxane before I put out Thick because I had written some of the most personal things I had ever published before. And what she said to me was, oh, you'll only do what you want to do. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that hadn't occurred to me. But as it turned out, you really can do that. You can only do what you want to do. And similarly to Roxane, I have people, I must say, disproportionately white women, by the way, who are extremely angry with me for the same reason. They want to know details about, right, how long was my daughter alive? How long did it take before I got the epidural? What kind of epidural did I get? What kind of medication? You say you were on something, but you didn't say what, right? And I get these long, dramatic emails from them about this. And then when I don't respond to their emails, they write me letters on a piece of paper, which I just think is an exceptional level of commitment. Right? And they send it to you. And what it is, just think about what you had to go through.
Right. Yeah. To get a stamp.
Right?
I
mean, those just aren't lying around anymore. We're in a different age. And they send these things to me. And what I think I have come to learn about that is about, you call it the trauma zoo, and there's a history of the human zoo in our culture, right? And what I think they cannot abide by is the sense of agency in the narrative of the trauma. We are more comfortable accepting agency from some writers as opposed to others. And I think it is a function of who I am writing about something. How dare you make me think about something when I don't know everything about you? How dare you make a decision about what you'll tell me? So few people have ever had to deal with someone who looks like me exercising their agency without them being able to use their power to push back. And the thing is, in a text, the author has already given you what they're going to give you. All a reader can do is try to hound you to give them more. And so they want to extract it from me and feel that in the real world, outside of the text, they can make me do it. And I'm like Roxane, I both push back on it and now tell my students, and people talk to me, very similar things about, there's something about once you release it, you never get it back, one. And once you release it, it can be turned into something that you no longer have any control over. Right. And so the entire narrative that you have poured your intellectual and creative energies into painstakingly creating, right, can be remixed and transposed against your will. And the more you give people of that to do, right, the more they'll do it. And so, I do think there's a fine line between what I'm willing to give to people versus what they want me to give to them.
And the other component of it is not only do they want to know everything and feel like they're owed everything, part of it is that they don't believe you.
That's right.
And so what they're saying is, prove it.
That's right.
And you see this all in ways that are very minor and small, like idiots on Twitter who are like, debate me. Like, prove me wrong. Like, motherfucker, you were born wrong.
Yeah.
And when you relate trauma and you don't give dates and times and names, all of a sudden what you have to say is illegitimate because they don't want to believe that this kind of suffering can happen. And it's a truly dangerous thing. I don't have to prove to you that what I said happened. I only had to prove it to my publisher and the legal team there.
That's right.
But I don't owe you shit. And it's really important for writers to know that your truth is your truth. And do people lie? Absolutely. But why? Publishing doesn't pay that well. It just doesn't. I got $15,000 for Bad Feminist. That's not enough money to bear my soul.
Also, did y'all know y'all were going to the Mountaintop tonight? Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did, because of who's here. But we're there. I have to bring in just, oh my goodness, the depth of what is being said. From my perspective as an editor, as an executive editor, working, selecting, soliciting, publishing, editing, personal essays and all of this, as someone who's writing a book and all of this. One, in the best case scenario, let's say you publish that piece, the best case scenario is whatever you give, people are going to want more, right? You publish the book, then they want it to be a movie. Isn't that the dream? Oh, maybe it's an audio play now. Oh, maybe it's like the best case scenario, whatever it is going to be more questions, more Twitter followers, more people in your mentions, more letters, more emails. Are you ready for that? Are you sure? The other thing is, and as you said, like, you know, however much you're being paid, it will never be enough. And that's why we don't do this for the money, because there's no money in the world that can give you back the worst night of your life. But even with that, the $50, the $200, the honorarium, the market is depreciating. You know, and I'm saying this as someone who's been, again, at BuzzFeed News for 6 years. You're not dumb. You know what's happening in the industry, okay? Here's what you need to know. That essay you think that you're going to write, and you're going to cannibalize the worst night of your life, and it's going to go viral, and 1 million people are going to read it, or 2 million people are going to read it, and you're going to get a book deal. I am here to tell you, friends, because of the way the industry is going, because of Facebook and Google gobbling up ad dollars, viral content is no longer profitable. Okay? So that means these media outlets no longer even have an incentive actually to value as much as they did a few years
and
ago.
it was always pretending. They don't even have to pretend.
They're not pretending. And so now they're forced to cannibalize themselves and their own content, quite frankly. And I say that as someone who's proud to do the work I do, but I say that because I'm just like, I look at young writers who cannot wait to publish this essay about this just transformative experience. And I understand that. I once felt that way, and I'm so grateful that I was protected by mentors who slowed me down, or mentors who are an editor and said, no, I reject it. It was the best thing that could ever happen to me, because you're throwing yourself into a hurricane. And I think these transformative experiences, frankly, are finite. I hope they are. I hope we only have so many experiences in our lives that we can go, I can write a good personal essay about that, right? You know? And so just when you're doing that and you're walking into that hurricane, it's just so much is going to kind of be taken away from you. And sometimes it's worth it. You know, what Roxane has offered to us with the body of her work is truly an offering. And I think I'm not the only person in this room who's just like deeply grateful, and I know it's changed my life, but there is a cost, and she's aware of it, right? But when you are a younger writer, oh my goodness, it's just scary how much, you know, younger writers don't know.
Yeah, I'm currently hiring an editor for a project, and one of the duties is on the job listing is that you have to be willing to protect writers.
I love that.
And you have to be unwilling to hang writers out to dry for clicks, because I'm not interested in clicks. Now, who knows how long that financial model is going to work. But it's important that in addition to writers not cannibalizing themselves, we have to develop a culture of editing and producing that doesn't expect the cannibalization. It goes both ways, like supply and demand. Stop demanding this supply so that people can tell the stories they want to tell for whatever reason, but be protected in doing so. Because as Saeed very aptly points out, you are not ready for the maelstrom that's going to come, and there will be no windfall at the end of it. It just is not going to happen. And you can point to 1 or 2 stories, but that's 1 or 2 out of thousands.
Thousands, yeah. And listen, it's like Cassandra, you know, it's like she's out here saying like, climate change is coming, y'all, and, you know, and everyone's like, whatever, you know. I understand, like, that is actually why it's so hard, you know, mentoring and being a mentee is we tend to think, yeah, but you ain't got nothing like I got, you know what I mean? So all I can say is, like, with deep prayer, find your people. You know, you have to have your people. I just think of like experiences like when I was a kid and I would just do something so obnoxious at school or whatever, and I would come home and my mom would be so disappointed in me. And I'd be like, but you know, so-and-so and who and why, they loved it. And she was like, who are they? Who are they to you? You know, you have to find your people who will do that, because it's absolutely true. in so many ways, and this isn't just essay writing, I mean, just take this, just more generally, there are always people who will let you make a damn fool of yourself. And they will smile, and they will laugh, and they will do everything when they're with you, but know that when you're alone, they're not going to be there for you. So you have to find someone who can protect you from those folks. Yeah.
And I think to be able also to this is probably a deeply unhealthy thing to say, but to be able to dissociate yourself from your experience is also really helpful when you're a writer. To be able to back up a little bit, and when people are talking about you on the internet, it's not really you, or to have a sense of humor about it. The one time I did go viral was about this not being believed by doctors. And, as you can probably guess, my whole Twitter timeline was men who didn't believe me, that I hadn't been believed. I was like, this is so puzzling. Why would this happen? And there was a whole subreddit thread that was picking apart my story and explaining why this couldn't possibly be true. And any first-year medical student would have diagnosed this instantaneously, and yada, yada, yada. And I was able to have a sense of humor about it and to say, this is literally what I'm talking about. You are proving my point right now. And that's really important, because otherwise that stuff can be really hurtful and re-traumatizing and damaging, especially when the whole point you're trying to make, and I think a lot of trauma stems from this, is I didn't have agency in the thing that happened to me. And then people just immediately try to take it away again.
When you try to own it, right?
Right, and that can be challenging if you can't get distance and look at it with an outsider's eye.
I know I haven't written something well if the only takeaway is that taught me about X experience. I know a book is not well received or whatever if it's this taught me so much about the Native experience. So I aim to go beyond that. Yeah.
I mean, you're all talking in such compelling ways about the support that you need and the kind of perspective as a writer. I'm curious about that may be the sort of, where would you divide if you are looking at a piece of writing and thinking, is this a self-cannibalizing piece, or is this doing something else? I have some ideas, but I want to hear your ideas about what are the things you see in those pieces, and I think you're starting to point us there, right? It takes us somewhere other than, oh, now I know about that experience.
Yeah, because that's tourism. There's nothing to gain, because they come in and they go, and they don't care, And so all of those books do very well because people want to tour.
That's right. People love them.
They don't want.
I was about to say, if you want to make a lot of money, do the exact opposite of everything we're
Yeah.
doing.
That's a good point.
Yes,
If you want.
People love that. I mean, it is probably the most direct route to the type of economic success I think a lot of people want. Right?
Why not?
Yeah, but I think if you want to have people, if you want to have a community,
And this is so good.
Yeah.
Isn't this good? I like this better than money.
I know when I'm off if the only thing I say to people all the time, if the only thing I've said at the end of something I've written is this thing has happened to me, then it didn't need to be written. I mean, that's what journals are for. And I get in trouble when I say that, but I stand by it. There is a difference between writing in my journal and writing for sense-making and place-making and argumentation. And I think one of the first steps we can learn is the difference. That's what I think a community should teach you. That's what being in a community of people is supposed to teach you, that is fascinating, and it is a journal entry. And now let's talk about what that would look like as a short story, an essay, or a novel, right? It's about learning genre. I think we don't tend to be very good at this as academics, but I think it is learning and respecting genre. So one of the ways that I try to keep a check on myself is to read the genre that I'm writing in, but outside of my subject area expertise. So for example, in Writing Thick, I don't think there's much in it that could qualify as a humor essay, but I read tons of humorists because I think they do a wonderful job with the form of the essay, and I wanted to be able to focus on that rather than on the content. So I read a lot of that. And so I know I've done it if I can see the form, I can see the structure in what I've written, And if at the end of it, it's about something other than me, but really, honestly, at the end, you can't ever be the ultimate check on that. That's where the community of people come from. You have to show it to other people, and that's a relationship, by the way. I have a black woman editor, and I tell people all the time, I probably wouldn't be publishing a thing if I did not have a black woman editing me. Because the amount of trust it takes to have somebody work through some of your most complicated thinking and emotional processes, and to trust them when they say it's there or it's not there, is a relationship. It is not something you can just mail off to something on a website. I'm sorry. I think that is wonderful for maybe structure or copy editing, but the actual, what an editor actually does for you is a creative marriage and relationship in its best sense, I think. And that is what that person, I think, is there to help you do, to know at the end whether you've hit that mark or not. And I think a lot of writers, and of course, that's also one of the hardest things for us to get, right? An editor who's invested in you in that way and in your work in that way, who will come to know how you think well enough to help you think better and to write better, and that's tough. But at the end of the day, I don't know that you're the only person who can determine that. I think other people have to help you figure it out. One of the greatest compliments to me is when someone reads me and they say, I thought I knew everything about that.
Yeah.
Right? I thought I knew how you make toast, and you just changed the entire toast making process for me. That's what I want to do every
That cinnamon is a
single
game
time.
changer.
Right?
I'll tell you what.
Listen, you thought you was doing it. You don't know about cinnamon. Like, I want to mess that whole thing up.
Yep. You know, I recently edited an anthology called Not That Bad, and I received about 330 submissions. And of those, 300 or so of those submissions were testimony. Were just people telling me about the worst experience of their lives. And the number one question I get from young writers is, I have a story that deserves to be told. And that's all they say. Like, and they really think that they've said something when they say this. And they have, but everyone's story deserves to be told. So why yours? Just because you went through it is not enough. And so that's the rubric that I'm using. Like, you have to offer more than just testimony. It cannot be a recitation of what you've been through. You have to contextualize it. You have to place it in a broader cultural discourse. And if you're not doing that, if you're not approaching it with some of the things we were talking about earlier, like nuance and complexity and dimensionality, then no, yeah, your story deserves to be told, but I don't want to hear it.
It comes back to the scabbing question too, I would think.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
that is a very difficult.
That helps a lot.
It does.
Right? That's why I think, again, I talk about Casey's work and some other who were able to have that level of complexity in their writing, even though they're still in the middle of it, is a level of artistry that, quite frankly, I think, very few people achieve with a piece of work. Most of us, I suspect, need to have some distance to do it well. And I think Saeed hit it earlier, to Roxane's point about dimensionality and complexity and nuance. All of that takes humility.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking, Viola Davis, she gave an interview that I thought it was subtle, it was quick. I think it was in the New York Times. But I thought it was incredibly bold because there is such a huge risk for actors to talk about past work, right? And she always talks about, like, even as lauded as she is, like, it's still just so precarious because she is a darker skinned black woman, over the age of 20. And, someone asked her about regrets. Wow, like Hollywood, you're never supposed to have any regrets. Every movie you've done is supposed to be the best movie. And she said The Help. And I think one other film, which I was like, well, I thought we were gonna have to wait like 50 years before Viola Davis would talk how she felt about playing a maid in The Help. Like, wow, And she said, I learned that it's one thing to make the movie, it's another thing to then have to go out there and promote it. And I was like, wow, I mean, you have Viola Davis, I just think one of our master artists, right? Like, truly, she is an auteur of performance. She can embody any character you put in front of her. I absolutely believe that. But she was like, that's not the question. The question is, 2 years after all of that, when you've moved on to other projects and da-da-da-da-da, and now it's, promo time and junkets and da-da-da, how are you going to feel when you have to sit again and again. And I sit, like doing a morning show, I sit across from these people and they're like, okay, I'm on my way to the next show. I just came from, when you're gonna have to do this again and again, and the podcast interviews and the written interviews and all the panels, how are you going to feel talking about this piece? It is one thing to write it. It is, again, very different to be out there and to really advocate for it. And the reason I think that hits so hard for writers is that I believe if you are a good writer or reader, and I believe you all are, you're here and you care, we care deeply. And we can't turn it off. And so I do really feel that when we're in those situations, and I think we've been in them maybe in different ways, where you're like, whoa, I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. It hits really hard. And so I think about her a lot for that reason.
Interesting. So are we ready to open up to the audience?
Definitely.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do it.
Y'all still out there?
Yeah, are you out there?
Hey!
Excellent. I think we have a couple of people with microphones. If you can wave them around. And if you have a question, wave your hand around, and then the microphone people will find you.
Yes. And if you're in the balcony, just stand up and we'll hear you. It's a church.
Yeah.
Forgot?
Sing it.
I didn't. God is watching. His eye is on the sparrow. That's what's up.
So I'm seeing a lot of you sort of stretch tentatively, which could just be that we've been here for a little while. But
Commit to the
Come on,
hand
you
wave.
can do it.
Commit.
Here we
There
go.
you are.
Here we go.
Commitment.
All right. Emily, we got a couple over here.
I don't know. I kind of like it when people are like stretching and taking their time, because that's how you know they're actually thinking about a question. Gratitude.
Okay, we can all sit.
Go ahead.
We can hear you. We can say
We
it
can
back.
hear
You
you.
can repeat it back, yeah. Listen.
My question is specifically for friends. Sorry for the record, but you don't have anything. But in the past, we've seen a lot of Indigenous writers use the term resilience in order to describe their survival. And even today, we see Indigenous people quick to use the term strong, resilient, and Indigenous. I was wondering, do you think it's appropriate to still call ourselves resilient, or is it an outdated term that keeps us in the past?
I'm not resilient. I don't recover quickly. I need years.
Yes.
Sorry, so
The question was about Indigenous people using the terms resilient and strong, and does Therese think that those questions are useful, or are they terms that keep Indigenous people in the past?
I think, majority white culture would love us to be resilient and empower and reconstitute ourselves in an assimilated world. And but I'm angry and hurt, and I think I've seen a Dene artist named Janelle Cronin. She made little stickers that had a blue rose, and it wrote resilient. And for her, that meant everything. It was a symbol of her being on a continuum that could not be erased. But for me, I am not resilient, and I don't want to be a meme. I don't want to. I see it in memes. It's like a woman with braids wrapped in a blanket. She's resilient, and I'm just the opposite, like messy and like crying and drinking Diet Coke. Like, I'm just not that. Symbol.
I love
yeah.
that.
Thank you.
I love that question and that answer, Therese.
Because I think it happens in all of our cultures. This like idea, the symbol.
If you're bold and resilient, we're strong black women
Yeah.
who don't need no man.
Excellent.
Do a whole
Like
thing.
you
Well,
don't
that
need
part's
anything.
true.
That might be true. Yeah, but the memification of everybody's culture here to be,
And we are excellent. But
as Audre Lorde, I think that's what Audre was pushing back against, right? When she says, if you're silent, they'll kill you, and you say you enjoyed it. Right, resilience means you deserve everything we inflicted upon you.
Yeah.
You can never ask for reparations
And that you can
if you're
continue to
resilient,
take.
Yeah.
right? Because you can never name what's been done to you if you're resilient. So, yeah, it's a wonderful tool for colonialism.
Yeah. Yes, I concur.
Yeah, there are a bunch of hands being raised in the back. Why don't you stand if you have a question so that they can actually see you?
Seems like a good call.
Like on your legs. Unless, there we go. Thank you guys.
Growth.
Hi.
Yeah, these mic I got. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Hi. I'm very curious after all this talk about watching people eat themselves. I want to know why you each personally think that people would want to see others eat themselves. I know that you mentioned just the economy of this tourism and being able to walk away unscathed, but why else do you think people would be attracted to seeing other people hurt?
Oh, that's human. Can I get the question? Why would people want to be attracted to watching people hurt when we talk about this tourism or this escapism that people do into other people's experiences? Did I have your question right? And that we talked a bit about the economics of it, but why?
I think it's the same reason people like to ride roller coasters.
Yeah,
And I say that with a little judgment because I don't like to ride roller coasters. It's like you want to feel like you're falling off a building, but you don't want to have to hit the ground.
That's right.
And have your brain splattered everywhere. You know, I mean, like trauma, like I don't say this word in a positive way, but it is thrilling in the sense of like a thriller, right? Like you don't, there's no adrenaline rush like having a gun 2 centimeters from your head and a crazy person on the other end of it. I promise you that. I mean, you will never feel anything like that in your life. And if you don't have to actually feel the certainty of death, I could see how that could be a little bit fun. Having all your hormones spike at one time. But you can't really get one without the other unless you have a very capable writer who's gone through it, who can simulate the experience for you that you can then have in the safety and comfort of your own home. When it starts to get a little too much, you can just close your book and have a cup of tea. I mean, I think, you know, we like to do these thrilling experiences, but you don't want to have the actual cost that's associated with it.
Yeah. It's a basic arousal response. You know, we're attracted to it.
People want awareness because they want to congratulate themselves for the awareness of something, but like, I think that's part of it too. Yeah.
There's a prurience. I mean, there's a reason why Criminal Minds has been on for, 15 seasons? Law and Order SVU has been on for 19? There's something voyeuristic in watching the suffering of others without having to actually experience that suffering yourself. And it's human nature, and I don't think it's a good part of human nature, but we have to acknowledge it nonetheless.
Yeah, I feel terrible for people who feel this way, and I pity them too, because I think so many people are dead inside. They may even say it, but I don't think they're perhaps fully aware, and I'm saying this is someone who felt this way at one point in my life too, aren't fully aware of how true that is. And they are looking for ways to feel again. And I think it is true in terms of the content, the entertainment, the art they are drawn to. It probably manifests, frankly, in all kinds of ways. But when you see the way people respond to, like, you know, I think reporting about Amy Klobuchar is really interesting to see how people, like, not everyone, but right, many people are like, oh, well, tough bosses, and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? R. Kelly, Michael Jackson, we see constantly how well people have rationalized, you know, their own trauma and what happens. And so, yeah, I think one of the manifestations of that deadness that many people enact, frankly, just to get from one day to the next in America, right, is that when there's an opportunity to try on someone else's skin suit, you feel something. There is an arousal. There is a sexiness. There is I feel something, if not just for a moment. Because why else? I mean, this is horrible. And I think intellectually, people understand that. No one wants to be the victim on Law and Order, but we keep watching it.
All right. I don't think those handheld microphones are working.
Is the volume up on those?
there you go.
And maybe we could turn the
I'm
volume up
thinking
a
as we
bit.
play with that, this is another piece of the cannibalizing, that if, I'm thinking, Roxane, you were saying someone has to feel scathed by reading it, that if the meat of the story is all coming out of the author, that's where we get what you're describing, right? Whereas if some of it is coming from the reader, you get out of your cannibalism mode.
That's a good point.
Did that buy us enough time? Do we have a mic?
Can someone try just shouting your question?
Why don't you guys
We can
just
hear you.
come forward?
Yeah.
White people have been shouting in chapels for so long. Let's give it a go.
It was designed for you.
Go ahead.
Good. Welcome. That's right.
Yeah.
That means you're in the right place. Thank you for that. And for the record, I don't belong here either, so it's all good. Welcome.
We see, I know you have a question here in the front row. You.
Check. Check.
No, just
Yeah, we
shout
can
your
hear ya.
question.
Yeah, because they always catch the right there.
Yeah.
They always catch the bad guy. Right.
How much does shame play into the work that you write?
That's a great question. So how much does shame
Do it,
play?
Saeed.
Yeah, how much does shame play into the work? Huge, and so much, so much. I think for all of us, right, but certainly if you're writing about sex and the body, shame. I went through college and only, maybe 6 years out of college did I realize that I was actually chronically depressed as a college student, like actually textbook. And I was hiding it in textbook ways by being a successful student, right? And it was all shame. It was all shame about sex. It was the shame that I think in particular is posed on queer people, where the big lie of shame in America about queerness is that coming out is actually the great work, and it is not. The great work is that to come out in America as a queer person means that you publicly, every time you come out over and over and over again, every day and day and day, you are recognizing that you have a different relationship to sex and desire than most people, and America shames us. And so, yeah, it exhausted me. And so to go back to actually your very first question, the time travel, that is for me. When can I find Saeed Jones in the timeline at those different seminal moments where shame seeped into my body? Because that's what it does. It seeps into our bodies like a poison, and it stays with us for so long, and it's so difficult to undo. And I think, for queer people, and just obviously for men, like, what is toxic masculinity? If you flip the coin, it's shame. That's what it is. And it's so incredibly dangerous, obviously. So in some ways, I feel like that's my project. That's my life's project, is to to flip the coin and to look at shame, because it's just terrifying.
Yeah, for me, the process of sharing has actually been really helpful in erasing some of that. You know, I think shame, a lot of the feeling of shame is just feeling like you're complicit in what happened to you, or you're alone in what happened to you, and no one else feels like this, you're the only one. And having written about some of these experiences, you know, like with being turned away by doctors, I mean, I felt like I wasn't a good patient. You know, I wasn't loud enough. And then hearing other people say, oh no, that's not just you, that happened to me too, was really validating. And similarly, you know, I made a comic about my experience of getting like held hostage at gunpoint for a while by this crazy lunatic. And I didn't write about it for a really long time because I didn't really remember it. I had this weird thing happening in my memory where I knew that it had happened and I felt traumatized, but I didn't have like a real, it's difficult to explain. It's like there's something in there, but it's chaos. You know, I couldn't remember a lot about it, a significant portion of it. And it felt like to say that would be to say, well, then I didn't really experience trauma. You know, can you even have trauma without conscious memory of something that happened? Wow. And then in writing, yeah, right, the answer is yes. Spoiler alert.
Yes.
That is what trauma is.
Yes.
In writing the comic about it, I did a lot of research in memory and trauma and the way that interacts, and it healed me, you know, like being able to write that and say like, yeah, my trauma is legitimate, even if my memory is altered, you know, that was really healing for me.
I also just would say, it gets better fighting back on shame. It doesn't necessarily get easier, at least for me. Maybe you feel differently, but it is like from sentence to sentence. You know, and then again, and I can say this, like I literally started writing about what happened as soon as I didn't go to therapy, I didn't talk to family, I didn't get support. I sat down and started writing because that was the only thing that made me feel powerful. Even having that sense of authority, you know, I was stunned by the persistence of doubt and shame, and the way they kind of tag team one another to keep you second guessing yourself every step of the way. And so I would also say, you know, we've talked a lot, I think a lot about emerging writers, but I don't know if any point in our careers or our lives combating the way our brains engage with shame and self-doubt is any less challenging. Like it's always going to be like Serena Williams on the other side of the net, is how I feel. Oh my God.
I would say, I think feeling a responsibility to a community of people made the shame. I mean, I think there was both the shame of my experiences and then the shame of telling them when I know that I was not going to be able to control how the gaze that saw it, right? So the thing is, when you're writing as a Black woman, you're always representing a group of people, whether you choose to or not, and more importantly, whether they choose you to or not. And I'm acutely aware of that fact, right? It's why I work so hard to locate my position in things, and why I push back against being a singular voice on anything, and why I want to talk to a universal Black woman's experience without talking about it being universal, right? And why I try so hard to do all of that, because I don't want my shame to be anyone else's. And at the same time, there is an inherited legacy, mostly from being marginalized and oppressed and demonized in majority white culture, of Black women not being allowed to share the kind of vulnerability one needs to have to do the kind of writing that is related to writing about trauma. We're not supposed to have. Black women aren't supposed to be able to have trauma. We aren't even supposed to be able to have that kind of vulnerability. And we may not be ready to show the underbelly when I'm ready to write about it. And so I felt a particular type of responsibility to knowing that gaze would be there, and whether or not I was sharing my shame or anyone else's shame. And I think writing, again, the specificity helped a great deal. And in many ways, though, the shame was how I knew where I needed to write. Perversely, right? You almost kind of have to start there and work it and write your way out of it and write your way through it. But yeah, I thought about it a lot, both my shame and other people's, and how that shame might be interpreted by others.
The mic just
Yeah,
doesn't
I'm
work.
telling you, I was about to say, it's not us.
Just speak loud and
That's
we'll
right,
get it.
thank you, it's not us, thank you.
Yeah, you know,
So the question was about sort of reading something very, very graphic and feeling moved by that and connecting to one's own experience, and where are the boundaries around where that is experience and where that's moving us individually.
yeah, for me, it's just how do you, are the details in service of something more than just being prurient, just being gratuitous? And I believe in explicitness when writing about violence. And I'm very explicit in pretty much all of my work when I do choose to write about violence. Because I think people need to know. The reason we still have people who say, oh, I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know that this many women deal with sexual harassment, for example, which we've seen a lot of people say since the rise of Me Too, is because we're not specific enough, often enough. And I think that there's a lot of value in reading specificity and explicitness in the experiences of others when, as for you, it mirrors something that you've been through. I find that to be very healing, to know, oh my God, I'm not alone. I am not the only one who knows how terrible this specific thing is. And so as long as it's in service of that, I think it's not at all gratuitous. You know when it's wrong, you really do. In these overly stylized things, there's a movie, and I can't remember the name, but there are two versions of the movie, and it's about a woman who's assaulted by her ex-boyfriend when she and her husband are visiting her country home somewhere. And I can't remember the name of the movie, but in it, they make the rape scene seem sensual and quite lovely. And it's rape. It's not supposed to be sensual or lovely, and she's clearly traumatized by it. And that's when you know, okay, that's wrong. That's not a good idea, because they truly make it seem like this really romantic thing, and it's not. So you just have to use common sense. But explicitness is not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm all for it, quite honestly.
I agree. Question here? Okay, so we've got a sort of double-barreled question. One about asking each of you about how you're writing about and thinking about trauma and memory, and a sort of specific question for me in my other role about whether or not the people who sit on our disciplinary board learn about trauma and memory. Yes, they do. I do that. And others do as well. There's a lot of training. But for you, in your writing, I mean, you started us down the path that...
Yeah, I mean, I've written, especially in that one comic, just really explicitly about it, like breaking down the science of like, here's what happens when your adrenaline rises, and here's what, cortisol does. And I don't know if this is too much information for that question, but like as a very quick primer, basically when you're experiencing trauma, it aids your body, your brain in storage of memory. Like it makes those memories really, really sticky and really vivid, but it makes it very difficult to retrieve them. So if you don't do it right away and you don't do it often and you don't beat yourself a clear path to accessing those memories, you lose the access to them. But they're there, you just can't get them. And when you're thinking about your trauma, the visual side of your brain is going crazy, like it really lights up, the sensory side, but the verbal side shuts down. So it's very chaotic. It's challenging to make a narrative. Like if you try to like relive the experience the same way you would relive like your morning routine, like, okay, I got up and brushed my teeth, you kind of see it like a movie in your head, it makes a lot of sense. Trauma, how it gets encoded in memory, it's chaos. Your brain doesn't, cross midline. It's not weaving together the sensory stuff with the narrative stuff, and it can be a mess. So if you don't talk about what happened to you immediately and you try not to think about it, which is what I did, I said, well, I'm not going to think about that. That way I don't have to think about it, which is awful. Then your brain doesn't learn to make that connection early enough, and it can make it more difficult to kind of heal from it later.
Well, you just explained everything I've ever written. I mean, literally, I was sitting there, I was like, oh yeah, that's why my immediate reaction was to go to my dorm and start writing down what happened. It also explains, I would say, like, and I tried to explain this to people before with my poetry collection, Prelude to Bruise, which is about a character named Boy who is black and gay and in America and experiences violence and peril, but is not me. Part of it is, America's relationship to poetry and the I, y'all know. We're at Yale, you get it. But what I tried to explain to people was that before I got to the point of maturity, therapy, support, that I could coherently begin to make sense of not just what happened to me in these traumatic experiences, but connecting the dots to all of the different memories. I'm looking at Roxane because she's read the book. She's read the memoir, so she understands what I'm talking about. The memories that, are so significant. Before I could do that, poetry, which was struggling, so Prelude to Bruise is really the kaleidoscope, version of what happened to me. Boy's story is not my story, but when I look at it, I see like, this is like these poems are like what I was dreaming about as I was trying to find my way back to that room in my brain,
I'll send you a link.
Okay, thanks, girls. Yeah.
I guess I had very few memories of, I really didn't want to remember, and I was okay with that, but when I wanted to cultivate a work explaining certain things, I didn't know how to put things in scene because I only remembered a few lines of dialogue. So what I did was I centered those in the narrative, like my mother, when I am a teenager and I ask her, did my father hurt me? I remember distinctly, she said, I put you in double diapers, there's no way he hurt you. Did he hurt you? And then nothing else. I remembered nothing else. But that was enough for the reader to understand. And then I contextualize it narratively for them to understand that the trajectory of my life led up to, it's in the same essay where I just give a list of all the horrible men I dated. And I just say, one I punctured with a fork. He heard me when I said no. One and I just list it because that's all they need. They don't need names. They don't need characterization. They don't need dynamism. So like you see the perspective. The narrative fits even though it's fragmented, That's really important craft-wise.
Yeah, for me, I focus a lot in terms of the psychological aspects on PTSD and the lingering of trauma and how that shapes memory. Because for me, what it has meant is I can be having a normal day and then I'll smell beer on someone's breath and all of a sudden I have all of the memories. And it just appears. And I try to find ways of communicating that in both my fiction and nonfiction, that memory is not just this visual recitation of something that you've been through, but that sometimes you have these flashes when you least expect them. And how do you deal with them when you're just going about your business, having a day, and then your life intrudes? And I'm very interested in that because we don't talk a lot about PTSD in these specific ways. We talk about it as this container for the aftermath. and it's not really well understood. And I try to address that as best I can.
I had a lot of memory issues. In my in my mind, the joke among my friends and family is, there's the before Tressie and the after Tressie, and actually my memories, because trauma changes you, fundamentally alters things in you. I'm like, Saeed, you just explained so much of my life, and I thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Because it is this. My memories they feel quite different before the trauma than the ones after the trauma, and then the memories of the trauma feel different even from those other two. And so one of the things I had to grapple with was how much was I going to trust myself. Right? And so, I went through this manic phase of trying to go through every diary I had, and I have written most of my life. So, I had these scraps of parts of what I knew at different moments in time, and they were helpful in priming, just to remind me of how it felt to be me at a point in time, which helped me understand why a memory was fuzzy, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it helped me with the temporal time, with the timeline. And then I had, and then there was just a decision I had to make that I had to trust my body's memories as much as I did my, what we think of really as memory, our cognitive memory. I had to trust my emotions. I had to trust what I had felt. And I had to give that some, equal weight in my narrative and understanding and trusting myself to write it. And then I had to be honest about the parts, I use details and metaphor a lot for that reason. For me, the way poetry was the structure of fractured memory for you, and I think the way you situate what you can remember and say, this will serve enough in the narrative and centering in the narrative. For me, it was about, I will ground mine in the details that I do know. And I actually get readers have told me a lot, just tell me the one. People will respond, tell me about the essay. That essay about the ribs? They'll say, and I'm like, the essay is not about ribs at all. It's just that I remembered the ribs that were sitting on the table when we had the conversation where my family looked at me and told me who was allowed to be raped and who wasn't, right? Who was good and who wasn't, and where I was supposed to fall on that line. I had remembered the ribs. And so for me, I centered the most concrete of those memories, and then very similarly structured the rest of the narrative essay around it. Similarly for me, being in the hospital and about to give birth, and I've been in labor for like 5 days, and it's there at the end, and realize we can't hold it off, and they haven't shown up yet with the epidural, and it's all very horrible. And all I can remember is when the anesthesiologist finally showed up, what the needle felt like piercing my spine. So that, for me, is where this narrative started. It was the most concrete of the details that I had, and I start and go there. But it was also just trusting that, that life is not, a series of empirical facts and data that operate in this way, and leaning into it rather than saying, I think some writers are more inclined to believe this, by the way, than others, just culturally, who we say we will distrust, right? So we start to doubt ourselves, and it was just me saying I wouldn't doubt myself about it.
Also, I want to say too, because it's something I've noticed just in this conversation, it's very apparent, and what I've read of your work, and now I'm like, I can't wait to go back and read so much more of everyone's work here, is that you're very candid about what you know, what you're trying to know, what you remember, what, that is, and I feel that way in my writing too, like it's part of the project. Like I'm not a reliable narrator. I don't think any of us are, and I just admire and at least myself gravitate towards writers who do that, because I feel that is true. And once you embrace, like, listen, I'm an unreliable narrator, but I believe in the mission of what I'm trying to do. Let's go. I think that's a powerful relationship for writer and reader.
And it opens up so much more space for, we were talking earlier about the need to be able to tell a trauma story that has a whole person in it, and not just one slice of an innocent victim in the midst of it, even though that is one of the slices. That unreliable narrator is precisely not the person who walks through step by step. I think we've got, one or two more questions. Let's do...
Love to get on the other side.
Yeah, some of those people in the back, we see you.
Yeah.
We see all of your hands. We'll try.
I don't mind giving up my question to someone in the back.
Oh,
Right there? Yeah?
yes. Sister right there. Yes.
Hello.
There we
Hey, you made the microphone work.
So, full disclosure, I'm a psychiatrist. So my question is grounded in that, but also a question about writing about trauma as a person. A lot of the supports that you talked about sound informal, and I wonder what formal supports in deciding what to talk about, what is your narrative, what do you recollect, what are the ramifications of telling your stories, what formal supports have you accessed in that journey, and have they been helpful or counterproductive? So for me, as someone who's grounded in the DSM-5, talking about PTSD with my patients, that's one way of intellectualizing trauma or traumatic experiences. But if I were reflecting on my own, that's more of a visceral, personal process. And I'm just thinking through what it means to reconcile those two things. So that's me as a professional, but I wonder, in you all accessing possibly formal supports, how do you fit that all into your process?
I don't draw a lot on formal supports because I don't have them.
I was about to say, I can't think of a single one.
Because when I was assaulted, I was 12 years old, and I didn't tell anyone. I did go to therapy, but that was at Exeter in 1988, and so that therapist, I don't even remember their name, honestly. So I don't have any sort of formal structural resources upon which I can draw from. I'm drawing entirely from informal structures, including memory and little things I would write over the years. I wouldn't call it a diary, but like a blog, this thing that used to exist called Live Journal.
I was just about to say my Live Journal.
Yes, ma'am. And so I think that's one of the hallmarks of a lot of the kinds of trauma, especially the trauma everyone up here has experienced, is that because I don't think any of us really trusted the justice system in any way, or knew that we could, we don't have any sort of formal codification. And in some ways that's a blessing, but in many ways that's a curse.
When I was, it's funny, it was like the way memories surface. When I was selling the proposal for this book, I was fortunate enough that several publishers, 8 publishers ended up bidding on it, which again, like I was saying, like the only good scenario was more. And I will never forget sitting in the office of an editor in New York who identified as a queer woman and being so excited to sit across from this person. And the first thing she said was, you know, we're gonna have to talk with lawyers with this. I had them look over it. She asked to meet me, by the way. And she's like, why didn't you report it? That was the first thing she said. Why didn't you report it? And she was, because at the time, the book actually opened in Phoenix, Arizona, with this incident with this guy. And I just remember she's talking and I was looking at my backpack and I was like, Saeed, you need to make eye contact with this woman, you know? And I realized, because I was really like, part of my brain was like, you need to get up and leave. So to say like the relationship of distrust to formal structures, it's there and it's real. I will say I'm fortunate that I have health insurance that has allowed me to be in therapy for the last few years, in part because I work in news in America, and I need all the help I can get. That's right. But also, you know, it is unexpectedly, you know, in working on the book, it has been such a grace, actually, that when something comes up, even the good news, I got some good news last week that I was sharing with Roxane, and I was so happy during the day, and by the time I got to my hotel room that night, I was just a wreck. And to be able to have a conversation about like, grief is back, you know, wow, you know, even good news can, you know, in its way trigger unexpected, you know, violent reactions and sad reactions. It was therapy being able to do that. But yeah, absolutely. I didn't trust nobody. Are you kidding me?
And to the point about institutional supports, so when I was robbed at gunpoint, we were the perfect victims. It was like me, my baby sister, my boyfriend. We were in her house, and it was the middle of the night. Just a crazy lunatic just busted in the house in the middle of the night and like lined us all up on the floor, and it was the whole thing. And we, you know, we felt great about our victimhood status, you know, and we called the police immediately and said, there's a man with a gun in our house, you know, and like hung up. We couldn't even like make sentences. And then when the police got there, they first accused us of inventing the entire story. And when we said, like, where's all our stuff? You know, where's my sister's car? Then they switched their tactic to saying, why would you give him your wallets? Why would you give him your car? You just helped him attack the next people. And it was like extremely re-traumatizing, you know, to, like, you just want the police to come and like make you feel safe, and you want someone, especially like when you're still in the very tender aftermath, to say like, oh my God, like poor baby, come here, are you okay? And it was the opposite of that. It was like blaming us, and we were all crying. We just wanted them to leave. And then, you know, they were there for like 4 more hours fingerprinting everything and interviewing us over and over again about things we couldn't remember. You know, it was like a whole thing. So it's, I mean, I don't know, like, can we ever rely on our institutions totally? I don't know. I mean, I want us to be able to, but I think that's part of
what I'm
makes it
writing is
trauma.
about exactly that, though, that how the institutions not only do not help, but in many ways either facilitate the trauma, you know, are responsible for the trauma, or re-traumatize. And so I'm generally talking about the everyday lived experience of, again, bureaucratic institutional trauma enacted upon people. And so, no, I very rarely, I mean, I have also had interactions. Listen, there was a man standing outside my house once. He had done the taxi scam, you know, where he claimed he couldn't take a credit card once he dropped you off, and you had to have cash, and so he wanted to force me to go to the ATM, and I wouldn't go, and so he blocked me in at my house and stand outside ranting and raving. It's 2 a.m. in the morning, and I live alone, and in that moment I thought, shit, I wish I had somebody to call. It literally never occurred to me to call the police. Literally never. Yeah. That is a trauma. I was thinking about how was I going to deal with the crazy man who was trying to kick in my door, and it never occurred to me to call the police, because you don't fix trauma with trauma, and you don't fix where I come from. You know, I'm just as vulnerable in one situation as I am in another, and in many ways, that's exactly what I'm writing about. Even in trying to, so one of the places where I have found, for example, in talking about and writing about my experience of maternal health care in this country as a Black woman, one of the more hopeful spots for me have been the sort of community-based institutional correctives, which is, doula communities and community health partners, and et cetera, who try to respond to those systemic failures. And I have found that to be helpful in the sense that it does remind me that what has happened to me, one, doesn't have to happen to other people, but that it has happened enough that people have figured out how to do something about it. Somehow gives me some strange sort of comfort. And so I very rarely appeal to formal institutions, find some comfort in community-based institutions, and in the same way, just think, I mean, it wouldn't even occur to me to do otherwise.
So sad. Sorry, I don't know why I laughed. I mean, it's like, it was so horrible that all I can do is laugh.
And we have to, I mean, I'll be thinking about this sentence for the rest of my life, but indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter. When Dr. Christine Blasey Ford said, it was like a lightning bolt, like fell through, you know, it just, my God. And so it's hard to even talk about, right, to have seen so viscerally that play out on the national stage, and the stakes being what they are for a Supreme Court justice confirmation. What could be more traumatizing? That is the epitome of power structures. And so what could be more traumatic than all of us being wherever we were, reading and watching and listening to see how that plays out, and to see what a woman who's talking about something that happened to her when she was a teenager, to see how it's adjudicated, not just like in American culture, but literally in the American power structure. It to me, you go, well, okay, you know, like it's, what is more destabilizing for our faith in these power structures than to actually need them in a moment of personal crisis.
All right, we have time for one last question.
That's right. Oh, I like
That's
that.
right. I stood up. There we go.
How
great question. Therese, do you want to
question.
start?
Yeah, I had,
We
Yes.
say the question back.
So at what point did we feel ready to write our stories, and at what point did we feel ready and secure enough to share those stories?
for my MFA, I had a thesis that was fiction, and it was with a Native woman protagonist who had a lot of bravado, and there was always a murky, dark ending in every story. And then I knew it was me, you know, and it's not murky. I was hurt.
Yeah.
And I know exactly how, and each time. And like, I reported one rape against me, and the detective never called me back. You know, my father went to jail for abducting a kid. You know, like, I don't care about the system. The system doesn't care about me. I know it could take away my kids. That's what I know about the system. So like, for me, writing, I knew I'd be only accountable to my family. You know, to my brothers, whose story was very close to mine. We were all abused, so I had to get his go-ahead. And once I started talking, he helped me fill in the gaps on how my dad really left and things like that. So it took like 8 years. 8 years of just knowing, like trying to figure out what happened in the view of everybody else and who I was going to be accountable to, not my ex-husband, not his family, to my brothers, to Native women, you know, and that was pretty much it, to my mother, you know? And then I was ready to be public about that. And it's just the way everybody's talked about it is, you have to keep excavating things. They keep asking for more. And I think you have to be really good at saying no. And I think once you have those things, you're ready.
Yeah, it took me 22 years to get to a place where I could publicly publish something about what I had been through. And I wasn't ready. I truly wasn't. And I'm never ready when I publish something terrifying. But I do it anyway. So I'm in a place where I know I can handle doing it anyway. But 22 years. And therapy for pretty much all of those 22 years, and some medication as well. Which goes a long way. Better living through chemistry.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So it's strange for me in that I think, so far what I'm hearing is, I think you'll know when you are enough of the person you're supposed to be, if that makes sense. Right? Each of us maybe needed something a little different to be that, but my experience of watching other people and asking actually a very similar question to many people when I was trying to determine whether or not I was ready was, I don't know, at some point you are yourself. I think that is, whether that's professional success, you are at a point in your life, you have been through therapy, I don't know, whatever that thing is that you needed to feel yourself. And when that happens, for me anyway, what happened was, I don't know, I couldn't not write it. It was the thing when I started saying, what can I uniquely say? What can I write that no one else can write, that might matter, right? And that I can do better than anyone else could have done it. And what don't I ever want to give up to anyone else? I don't want to cede this story to anyone else to tell it for me. When I was confident about who I was, and for me, that was about, I'll be honest, about a certain amount of professional comfort. Because if I was going to take the risk of telling my story, I knew I was risking it not only for myself, but for people I cared about. I needed to be able to protect them, right? And so some of being, you know, my professional stature is that I could do that. I could say no.
Right.
I could say no. Sometimes we can't say no, and that's just a reality, right? That's not about like the spiritual woo-hoo-hoo. No, that's about, I don't know, can you say no and still eat next week? Like, those are sometimes the practical considerations. It was about finally being a person who could, who knew how, who could articulate it. Because when you can say no, you've learned to value yourself in a particular kind of way, and you know yourself in a particular kind of way. And I do think you have to have that grounding before you do it. And then it was, I don't know, was I ready to share it? Again, somewhere along the pathway there, I had made relationships with people that I was willing to share it with, right? And once it becomes circulated in your small community, I think that you start to acclimate yourself to the idea that this will have a public, right? And then I do think that you're ready.
I just wanted to chime in about the system and stuff like that. I knew if I had written about drinking or anything like that, it might be likely they might call CPS on me to do an investigation again, because I had had that when I was a welfare mom, you know, so have money to litigate if somebody is
Coming for you.
yeah.
Yep.
I think that's really important too, to have the cushion of like, I can defend myself
That's right.
financially.
Absolutely. I had my PhD, or I was just about, I was actually in graduate school getting my PhD, but I knew in my soul I was going to get a tenure track job. I don't know how, but I was right. And so knowing that I could write whatever I wanted to write without losing my job and my means of supporting myself made it a lot easier to be able to tell my story.
Yeah, for me, I'm ready to put it out, you know, and write it when I can do two things. One is to find the what is the something else so that it's not just the trauma zoo. And then the other thing is how can I put form to the chaos? Because for me, if it's trauma, then it is chaos in my head. It's not a neat and tidy narrative. And coming into comics, which I've just started like about 2.5 years ago, has really opened a lot of doors for me in that. I don't think I could have written about the robbery in words because it wasn't, you know, like I said, it's not in my brain that way. It's in my brain in images. So that was really important. Also, Roxane mentioned the anthology Not That Bad earlier, and I have an essay in that book which is very structurally bonkers. You know, it's got like sections that are math problems. It's all over the place because that's the only way I could put form to that particular chaos. So once I can figure out how to lasso that chaos into something that I can show to somebody else and it will make sense, and then once I understand what it even is I'm trying to tell them, then that's when I'm ready.
Everything that has been said, absolutely. The support, the cultural capital, financial capital, finding your people, time, just reading more, becoming a better writer, all of those things contribute. You just know it, only you can know. And even then you don't really, but you know, you develop that intuition and you have to trust it. I guess two things, I mean, you know, one, it was about 10 years. You know, again, I was always writing it. I always felt safe in workshops and everything. That was always fine. Very head down, I'll write whatever. But publishing took about 10 years. I met a man named Isaac Fitzgerald, who was a wonderful editor and became my best friend. And he made me feel very safe. And he introduced me to a woman named Roxane Gay. And she was a wonderful editor and writer, and she made me feel very safe. And that's how I published the essay. But the other thing, too, was that I was moving toward, at this point, like this is like 2012, I was moving toward a job that eventually became the job at BuzzFeed and becoming an LGBT editor, building the vertical there. I was just so aware of the peril. Like, I mean, we're still, like, toxic masculinity, all of these things is like kind of a day one conversation. But in 2012, I was like, my God, like the pervasiveness of hate crimes and the pervasiveness of what I think of as, I don't know, like ghost crimes, which are like the unreported violence against queer people that's involved with relationships. And it's just like even messier than you were walking down the street and someone accosted you. Was just so clear to me. And people were being gunned down, just it seemed like left and right. And you know, trans women, I mean, it was just everywhere. And I just felt so aware of the dearth of good, or really any writing about internalized homophobia and internalized sexism in gay men. I could not find enough books or essays about the way gay men intake everything we've said tonight and enact machismo to our detriment, our obsession with straight white men and violence and what that does to us. I just wasn't seeing it, and my people were dying. And so I just felt like, girl, we got to put something out there, you know, and I don't know if I'm the best person, but I'm gonna do my best. And I think for all of us, the pain eventually, frankly, of withholding becomes too much, you know, and you do your best.
So I, and I'm sure everybody else, have many more questions, but I'm looking at the time. I am so grateful to be part of the public that you're talking to, that each of you have found your way through the time, through the support, through the great editors, to wanting to put these things out here. Thank you for enacting this community for us tonight on stage. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are going to have a 5-minute reorganization break, and then our panelists are very generously going to stay and sign books for a little bit. So thank you all for having been a wonderful audience. Let's have a moment.